Hello, today we'd like to speak about the idea of idolatry and adultery and the connection between the two. Well, if you have a look at the actual words themselves, you immediately can detect a bit of a similarity. Idolatry, adultery. Yeah, if these were actually Hebrew words, with the light bulb will go flashing straight away, because they'll be literally the same consonants. And in Hebrew, I think, as we've indicated before, there's only consonants in Hebrew. The vowels are sort of not written down. Strictly speaking, you can put vowels in, but usually you just have to know what the vowel is of each word. But yeah, so if you've got the same consonants of two different words, we know there's an intrinsic connection there. We spoke about this idea, the idea of dover and dover, the idea of word and thing. Like they've got the same consonants there, similar idea. As we explained, the idea of the spiritual roots of something being the word or the name of the object, and the object itself is basically a physical manifestation of the spiritual roots. We spoke in the lecture about Lashon HaKodesh, the holy language. Okay, so let's see, where do we see that this connection between idolatry and adultery? Or we can say, immorality, we can call it, immorality between a man and a woman, and that type of thing. So one example is the Gemara in Sanhedrin, I think is around page 60, somewhere around there, 61, yeah. But it says that the Jewish people, obviously referring to in the Tanakh, they only committed idolatry in order to permit for themselves immorality, like the type of immorality we're going to speak about here is going to be the immorality of relationships between men and women. So they only did that idolatry in order to permit immorality. And we can see the idea basically is that what stops people being immoral, right, besides having a conscience, but I mean, you're not hurting anyone, you're not killing anyone, you're not stealing, so theoretically there's no humanistic reason why immorality should be wrong. So what's stopping a person doing that is only because there is a concept of there's a creator who says this is the wrong thing to do, and once that's pushed out the way, then everything becomes permitted. So the idea, so once people serve idols, they think, okay, so we're rejecting God, so therefore we don't have to keep his rules either. So now we've got an excuse to do the immorality. So it's sort of a way of rationalizing the permission to do these sort of things. So that's how idolatry leads on to immorality. We do see as well in the story of Bilam and Balak, where Balak hired Bilam to curse, obviously, the Jewish people, and he was not successful because God miraculously forced Bilam to actually bless the Jewish people. So his power of cursing, which was quite a powerful power he had, that's why he got hired, obviously. He had this unique power to be able to curse people, nations, and actually he knew how to make the curses work, as opposed to just like getting angry and cursing a person. He actually knew the technical power of cursing, but God actually converted his speech. He flipped it round to bless instead. And at the end, he told Balak, sorry, can't do anything. God's not letting me curse him. However, I've got another way of destroying the Jewish people, because there's one thing which will make God abandon them, right? God hates one thing in this world. It's immorality. It's promiscuity and immorality. And if you get the Jews to sin in that sin specifically, then you're going to be able to damage them. Okay. So they came up with a plan that they would have, as the Jews were traveling, they wanted to buy stuff, so they set up stalls where they would be selling stuff, and the daughters of Midian, or Moav, those are the two nations which were involved there, would present wares on the outside, sort of like a storefront, and they would invite the Jewish men in to see more of the wares on the inside. And once they got in, it wasn't an old lady on the outside. It was actually a younger, more attractive lady, and they would basically seduce the men. And they were very successful. Quite a few men perished because of that. A plague came out, and many people from one of the tribes actually died because of it. So it was actually a big tragedy which happened there. But part of the process is when they said the Jewish men would ask to commit the act with these women, the women would first take out an Avodah Zarah, an idol of sorts, and say, bow down to this or accept this as your God before being with us. And that way they got the Jews to actually sin in immorality and idolatry as well. Right, so we see the connection there again. So what's the idea? Why does one thing necessarily lead on to the other? What's the common theme here? Right. We also know that there's one other example before we get on to the answer, is that in the Purim story, we know that Haman tried to destroy the Jewish people in Persia, in the Persian exile, and the rabbis revealed to us that this was based on one of two different sins. One of them was because they ate at the Seudah, the feast of Achashverosh, who was the king of Persia at that time, and Mordechai, the leader of the Jewish people, he warned the Jewish people, do not do this, right? This is, even though things are kosher there, there's going to be women who are going to be serving. It's going to not be they're not going to be the most modest. There's going to be immorality there, and you don't want to stumble in aspects of this area, right? The idea of kedusha, of holiness, right? But there is, and because they did go to the feast in the end, they had the gezerah, they had the decree not to be destroyed basically by Haman, but they repented just in time, and there's a whole discussion in itself. Maybe when we get closer to Purim, which is in a month or so, month and a half, maybe we'll do a talk about that. However, the rabbis revealed to us that there's a much earlier sin which they were being caught on, and that was in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, after the destruction of the first temple, which was about 70 years earlier, something like that, right? I can't remember the numbers exactly. A bit more than 70, yeah. A bit complicated with the numbers. Okay, I think it was something like 70 years earlier, around there. The Jewish people were, at the time, they were exiled to Babylon, and the king there was Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was the one who destroyed the first temple, and he erected a statue of himself, and he insisted everyone will bow down to it. And we know that famously Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah didn't bow down. And I think, I hope I'm getting the story straight, that when Daniel was put into the den of the lions and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were thrown into the fire, and they were miraculously saved, they didn't die. But other Jews did bow down to this statue, whether it was an actual idol or not. The rabbis discussed that, whether it was technically idolatry or it was just out of respect for Nebuchadnezzar. They still shouldn't have done it. So we see, again, the destruction was decreed based on one of two reasons, probably both, right? The idolatry, or the quasi-pseudo-idolatry at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, and also they're benefiting from the feast, where there would be promiscuity at the time of Achashverosh. So what's the connection there? Right, so we know that just as an aside, we know that the way that the Jewish people look at holiness means, as we spoke about last time, the idea of eating. The holier something is, the more potential for good that something has. God balances things out, and things have a greater potential for destruction. The more potential for good, the more potential for destruction. Very similar to Rabbi Tatz gives the example of, imagine you've got like a AA battery, small battery. It can power a small a toy or something, or a clock, right? An implement. And if a person touches both ends, and whatever the fingers are wet, whatever, you get a little shock from it. However, it's got limited potential for good and limited danger as well. But if you've got a nuclear power station, right, that can power a whole city, right? That's immense power. But if things go wrong, it's not just going to give a person a little shock, as we know, unfortunately, from the Chernobyl, the disaster there, the nuclear power plant melted down, right? Nuclear meltdown, rather. Right? I don't think it literally melted like a piece of wax, but you had a nuclear meltdown where the radiation went everywhere, and it killed many people, and caused lots of deformities. It caused terrible destruction. So whenever something's got a lot of potential, it's also got that potential for destruction as well. As we spoke about in the lecture about eating, eating's got an immense power to elevate the physical world, right? And as you become one with the thing which you're trying to eat, and by doing that, you're hopefully elevating it to a higher level. You're giving it the ability to have infinite existence forever as part of you. But of course, the sin of Adam, as we said, that was he ate from the tree of knowledge, which was the idea of the food bringing him down. But there, specifically, the food was a type of food which was the concept of confusion of good and bad. Right. So we know that the idea of immorality, right, as opposed to the union between men and women, when it's done in the correct way, are two opposites of something very, very powerful. What exactly is that power? Well, we know that it's the power to give life. You can create new life with it. So obviously we know that, just anecdotally, we know that there's immense power in it. Exactly what is it? What? Let's try pinpointing exactly what this concept is, the idea of a connection between men and women, and see the underlying idea, how it's connected with idolatry, and what the dangers which can come out from it are. Okay, so the connection between idolatry and adultery, we can actually see in the no less than this week's Sejra, this week's Torah reading. Actually, this week we're reading Parshas Yisroi. It's Exodus chapter 19 and 20. Speaks about the giving of the Torah, right? And God said the 10 Commandments to the Jewish people. That's the formation of the Jewish nation. This is our narrative, which our whole religion is based on. That God spoke directly to the Jewish people, and He told them 10 commandments. And later on, the Jewish people received, originally it was 40 days, but they got broken. The whole story of the serving the golden calf. So really it was more like 120 days later, Moses came down with 2 tablets. 5 of the commandments were written now, engraved on one tablet, and 5 on the other one. Right? So you had the 2 sets of tablets, each with 5 commandments. Now, if you see them lined up with each other, right, you see that you've got 2 sets of 5. So number 1 corresponds to number 6, number 2 to number 7, etc. So we're just going to focus on these 2 now. The second of the 10 commandments is a prohibition to serve idols. There should be no other gods before me. Right, and on the other side, the parallel, I should add on here, people don't know, sometimes take things for granted, depending on my audience. The 5 which are on the right side, this is the right for you, okay, are the 5 commandments which are to do with our relationship with God. They're called Ben Odom Lamokim, between man and Hamokim, the place, which is God, who is the place of the whole world. Right? And then on the other side of the tablets, you've got Ben Odom Lachavero, between man and his friend, which represent the commandments which are to do with how we treat other human beings. So on the right side, you've got the second one is not committing idolatry, not serving idols, and on the left side, you've got the second one there, which is the 7th in total, is not committing adultery. So what's the connection there? So we see there's a connection. It's just one of them's to do with humans, one's to do with our relationship with God. So that already gives us a bit of a clue that there's a common theme here. So let's think about what's the idea. What is the problem with idolatry or adultery? So you could approach this from either side. Let's approach it from the side of idolatry first. The idea of idolatry is that when we serve God, we believe we have to go directly to God himself and not go through any intermediary. The idea of idolatry is that God sets up the universe in such a way, we're going to speak about this hopefully in the next lecture actually, the way that God sets up the universe is that there is seemingly intermediaries between us and God, where sort of like to hide God's action in a clear way, so we still have free will, he channels his divine energy, his creative energy, through different forces. This can be in the form of angels, it could be in the form of the constellations, the sun, the moon, the stars, and they have real energy coming out from them. However, the problem with idolatry is that instead of connecting with God himself and saying, God, please give us this energy, how are you going to give it to us directly through the stars? Doesn't matter, because we're asking you though, right? But instead of asking God, they're actually praying to God's tools, if you see what I mean. So imagine someone's someone's going to a king to ask them for some money or some food, and the king's hand is holding coins or food, and he says, "Oh, please, glorious hand of the king, oh, can you please give me the food?" Right? And instead of looking at the king, you're looking at the hand. It's like you're speaking to the hand as if it's something detached from the king, and that's very, very insulting, to say the least. Also, you're recognizing there another power besides God. Right? Really, our job in this world is to reveal there's nothing besides God. Remember our third Keystone lecture, right? That's the whole way that God brings the whole universe to its fulfillment, by revealing that there's no other power besides God. As soon as we actively recognize another power, right, and we act upon it, we actually start praying to it, not just thinking it, we're actually acting on it, that does such damage to the overall plan of God that it's essentially cutting God out of the picture so much that it actually kills us spiritually. Well, God forbid, and not us, but it kills the one who's doing the idolatry. It creates an immense damage to God's plan, right? And remember, the more potential something has, connection with God, the more potential there is for destruction. So disconnection with God, so you can imagine how serious that is. That's the idea of idolatry. So what is the problem of idolatry essentially? Is that we are not looking deeply enough into our relationship with God. We're looking at God in a way where we're seeing something external, maybe something physical, you could say, about God. And by doing that, you're detracting from God's essence being the only thing which has any power in this world, right? That all powers come from God. But as soon as you recognize something else, you're looking at something which is meant to be a mask, right? The mask is there for a reason, but you're making the mistake of treating the mask as a reality. That's what you're doing. You're giving priority to something which is secondary. Remember, we spoke about the root of all evils, that long lecture there. We said that the idea of evil is taking something which should be secondary to a primary main concept, and the secondary one is actually meant to be there to help the first one, be manifest. But instead, you attach importance to the secondary over the primary. So we spoke about the idea of Adam eating from the tree, eating, right? Yeah, the idea of the trees were meant to be as delicious as the fruits which they produce, which represents the idea that the roots of something are no less than the product. However, when the trees produce fruits which tasted good and the tree didn't taste good, there's a problem there. That's the idea of the product being more desirable or more important than the root. That's the idea of the trees and the trees producing fruit, which has significance. The tree, of course, you can't get the fruit without the tree. You can't get rid of that. But to recognize the fruit as the main thing, and the tree is just like a means to an end, whatever, but that you're not important, that is basically the idea of making something secondary more important than the primary. Okay. Even though our benefit comes from the secondary thing, but it's really a manifestation of the primary thing. So here as well, by serving idols, you're serving that mask, that secondary, that filter which God uses to filter his light through into the world, to give us blessing, to give us sustenance and prosperity and existence itself, in fact. The idolater sees that mask as the primary thing to have a relationship with. And by doing that, you're cutting out the real primary thing, which is God himself. That's the idea of idolatry. You're making a connection with the externals, but without taking into account without actually connecting to the internal, to the real reality, only something which is only a clothing. Yeah. So let's go on to adultery now. Yeah. So adultery is also a very similar idea. Hopefully you see the idea now. Adultery is when a person has a relationship with, let's say, their wife, as they're meant to. Yeah. That is a deep connection between two people. You're causing a connection, a deep connection. And that connection is a connection of two minds, two personalities coming together, and by the internal connection between two people, which also has a physical manifestation as well, right? It says it's a meeting of minds and emotions and physical bodies as well. This results in life. This creates life. This idea of unity of two things creates life. This resonates with the idea of human beings. What are human beings? They're a soul, a spiritual element, and a body, physical element. Life is only when you have the two together. A soul without a body is, if you want to go very deep into our first Keystone lecture, it's a soul which can't exist because it's got nothing to give to. Whereas a body by itself is literally, it doesn't have any energy because it doesn't have anything to animate it or to give it life. Right? The life comes from the soul, but even the soul can't live properly without having something to give to, something to connect the body. So a human being is the merging of a soul, a spiritual element, and a physical one. And when we are in this world, what do we see? We see the physical. The physical expresses the desires and the thoughts and the plans or whatever of that soul. That's the idea. So when you look at a person physically, really it's representing a hidden spiritual reality. Very interesting. I think atheists who want to deny the idea of God behind nature, they also try to deny the idea of a soul in a body as well. Yes, you can see the similar idea here. So the desire for connection, the desire of a man and a woman together is really a desire for connection. It's to become unified with someone else, right? Now, that's all very well if it's in the framework of a marriage, a loving relationship where there's an understanding, there's a depth to it, and the physical is just the finishing touches. That's in order that there could be a physical connection as well as the intellectual and emotional one. The Ramban and the Nachmandi speaks a lot about the holiness. It's one of the most holy things in Judaism is the connection between man and woman, and he goes through this idea of having to have this very deep connection, right? And the physical is only the sort of like the finishing touches, right? And he speaks about if a person has a relationship even with his wife, but in a purely physical way, without having that preceding connection of the minds, right? This is also brought down in Jewish law as well. It's forbidden to have relationships even with a wife if there is an emotional or intellectual or spiritual rift between them. If they've had an argument, for example, something like that, they can make up the argument, and it's actually much better afterwards, right? Make it up, but it can't be in a situation where they hate each other, or there's an argument, or one of them's not fully aware, they're too drunk, for example, right? So it's very important to have that connection of the spiritual when being intimate. Now, that intimacy produces life, right? It produces a child. That's what it does, right? Just like our connection with God produces life, because our connection with God is how we end up existing, because God channels his energy to us, right? So too, when we connect with another human being, we can produce life like that. However, if that connection is based on externals, you don't have that spiritual connection anymore. And what you have is a physical connection which is lacking a spiritual connection. That's what idolatry essentially is. Idolatry is you're connecting with, I'm not interested in you, God. I'm just interested in these energies which you're sending down. Well, they're very interesting, very exciting. Well, there's this and that. Okay, let's worship them. Instead of having this abstract, deep connection with God who's not knowable, is not visible, is not physical. There's no physical form or imagery there. Imagery. It's internal. It's a deep connection. It's profound. It's not something based on outward projection. right? You're connecting to Hashem, to God Himself, right? Right. So the same thing is with a relationship, intimate relationship between men and women. The connection has to be between them. If people connect only on the physical level, that's called zanus. That's called what's the word for it? Zanus. Immorality, right? It's not adultery. Is when it goes even further. Is when a person has a relationship with someone else's wife, and that's the ultimate. That's the ultimate betrayal. When the woman goes and says, "Actually, I'm not interested in the husband. I'm going with a different husband." Just like the idolater says, instead of I'm going with my real husband, I'm going with someone who's not really my husband, who's not really got that intrinsic connection with me. It's just an ad hoc connection, and based on what? Not based on anything deep, but based on a physical attraction. That's essentially what adultery comes down to. Is a person's more interested in the externals rather than the internals. We've got a very nice allusion to this with the story of Joseph, how when he was sold as a slave in Egypt. This is in, I think, chapter 38 or 39 in Genesis, something like that. Right, the whole story. He was sold to Potiphar, and Potiphar was out the house, and Potiphar's wife desired Joseph, and she tried to seduce him, and he rejected her. He ran out the house, but he left his coat by her, right? And she said, look. Later on, when her husband came back, look what the servant tried to do. She tried to flip it to make it look like Joseph was trying to seduce her, and she was the virtuous one. But she used the coat. She said, look, he left his coat here, right? Right, when I screamed out and said, hey, help, our Jewish servant is trying to do adultery with me. Right, he ran away, but he left his coat. Look, and it's my proof. He left the coat. What's the idea? On a deeper level, Joseph was telling her, "What are you really interested in? It? Are you interested in me as a person, or are you just interested in my externals, my facade, my physical outward appearance? Are you interested in me, who I am, or my clothing, i.e., my skin, my face, my body?" So that's what you're interested in? So here, take my clothes. Because essentially you're just having a relationship with the coat. That's all you're doing. You're not having a relationship with me. Yeah? It's a fake version of having a relationship. So now we understand very nicely the connection between idolatry and adultery. The idea is that we're having a relationship. The correct way we're meant to have a relationship with God is Him directly, without any intermediaries, without any physical imagery or form or conduits. And idolatry is latching onto those. It's sort of like, is you're taking the easy way out. I don't want to do the work in connecting with God. It's hard work connecting with God. Right, especially praying to God. You have to pray to something which you don't have any picture of at all. It's very hard, as we explained in the second Keystone lecture, the nature of God. But we're trying to connect with that being on a very deep level, and it's hard, right? It's much easier to get your spiritual energy by praying to something which is not so demanding, which is actually quite easy. For example, physical thing, sun, look how bright it is. So people, when they serve the sun, they bow down to the sun, they pray to the sun. It's very natural, it's very easy, because they can see the sun, right? And if they understand the spiritual forces which come from the sun, maybe they can even tap into them somehow, right? Or any other type of idolatry. Idolatry is always connected. Well, I don't know about modern idolatry, but in the times of where idolatry was rampant, people appreciated certain spiritual forces which came from the different heavenly bodies and things like that, and even physical things have a reflection in the spiritual domains. So it's much easier to tap into. Right, so it's basically a cop out. You're being lazy, yeah. You want the immediate gratification rather than the long-term work, right? And that's exactly what it is with a marriage relationship and adultery. Marriage relationship, you've got to put in the hard work, have a real deep connection, right? Especially for men, they'd rather have something more immediate, something physically gratifying. Right, but instead, self-control, working on building up the relationship, and women are the ones who are very good at the relationship side of it, right? So they're the ones who bring out the potential of the men to have a real relationship, right? But a person can choose to have a shortcut. I want to have that pleasure of a deep relationship, but immediately without putting in the hard work. So how do you do that? You go for the externals. Just go for the physical side. You have a physical relationship as opposed to one without any spiritual or emotional connection, right? Of course, you can fake it, right, to make it feel more real, but it'll never be real, right? Like Joseph and Potiphar. Here, you want to have a relationship? Okay. You're making a mistake. You're just taking my coat. There's no connection between us. Right, okay. Is that everything? All right, and that's so now we understand why these are on two parallels on both sides of the luchos, the tablets. Yeah, because each one represents the idea of rejecting a real connection for the sake of a fake connection, right? A connection which is only skin deep, right? Adultery, and we see the connection between the idolatry and immorality in those different stories, especially the one with the daughters of Moab. What did the women say to them? Oh, you want to have znus with me? You want to have an immoral relationship with me? All right, so she takes out an idol, bow down to the idol. What was she saying there? She was saying to the Jewish man that, oh right, so I've got you. You're a person who's now looking at things in a superficial way. So you're detached. You've just detached the internal from the external of human beings, because you're looking at my external. You don't know anything about me. I'm just a shopkeeper who just met 2 minutes ago, right? So you're only interested in my outside, right? Right, so now I've got a hook. Now, serve idolatry. Look how nice idolatry is. Look how easy. You just got to do these few ritual actions with the idol, and you can get amazing sort of energy from it, right? They were tapping in to that mistake of adultery, and then extrapolating it and bringing it further to the idea of idolatry by getting people tapped into the detaching the internals and being attached to the externals. I'll finish off with a beautiful idea. In the Torah, this is from Rav Moshe Shapiro, I believe. Oliver Shalom. In the Torah, the word for idolatry is usually Elohim Acherim, which means gods of others, right? Or other powers, right? However, the way the rabbis referred to idolatry is a word which you don't find at all in the Tanakh. It's very strange. It's called Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah means just strange worship, right? So people understand it's talking about you worshipping strangers, like not God. You're worshipping strangers. That means idols. But if you look at the actual word Avodah Zarah, Avodah actually means worship, and Zorah means strange, right? It doesn't say avodas zorim, right, or avodas kechovim mazolos, which is another term which is used in the Gemara, in the Talmud. Avodas kechovim mazolos means the service of stars and constellations, but the normal term is Avodah Zarah, a strange service, and this tells us that you're not referring in this phrase to that entity which you're serving. That would be Avodas Kechovim Mazolos, the service of stars and constellations, or Avodah of Elohim Acherim, of gods of others, right? It doesn't say that. It says Avodah Zarah. It's a strange service. Why? Because when people are having a connection with Hashem, that's real, right? That's a real connection, and that produces life force and energy and connection, and ultimately infinite pleasure, as we spoke about in the very first Keystone lecture. That's the idea of a real connection. However, and that's a connection of mutual giving. So God gives to us, but we give to the body, and the body gives to us, like we explained, and ultimately we're giving God the opportunity to give to us. So all those elements, all those entities in that relationship are all giving to each other. However, when a person serves idols, or a person who's an adulterous person, what are they really doing? Are they giving? Is this a giving or is this a taking? Let's think about that a bit. When a person doing adultery or being immoral, what are they thinking about? We spoke about this with Yishmael, the characteristic of the Arab nation, right? The idea of they want to be givers, but they force the giving to themselves, right? This idea of wanting to have connection, but they don't want the connection in order to give to others. They want the connection in order to satisfy and ingratiate themselves, gratify themselves. That's the idea of the Muslim idea of the world to come, where it's basically taking, it's just enjoyment of women. So when a person is doing adultery or having any immoral relationship, they're really not giving. They're not interested in giving that person, right? Of course, there can be exceptions where there's an emotional attachment developed first. I'm talking about the basic idea where most people end up ultimately committing this tragic sin. Is they're really taking? Yeah. She looks nice, right? I want her, right? So let's be nice to this person. Let's get a connection. But why am I making that connection? Why am I serving this woman, right? Why am I giving to her? Because really I want to take. It's giving in order to take. That's not service. That's what idolatry is. Idolatry, as opposed to service of God, where you're trying to altruistically give God the opportunity to give to us without thinking about yourself, like we explained in the lecture about Lishma, about altruism. We're trying to give God, so to speak, right? In that element anyway. Of course, you can't give to God anything because God's perfect. We're talking about God's desire to give to us. We're giving Him the opportunity by making ourselves fitting for Him to give to us, by being givers ourselves. So when we're relating with God, our service of God is to serve God. We're trying to do something for God, so to speak. However, idolatry is the opposite. Why do people serve idols? Right? They've just got a nice physical life. Are they really interested in having a relationship with the idol? Really, they're trying to get something from the idol, right? Right? Even modern idolatry, you could even say people do it for emotional reasons. Yeah, I feel like I need to have meaning in my life, so therefore I serve this. Yeah, it makes me gives me atonement for my sins. I feel guilty and low and dirty, and by serving this idol, Oh, they say they're going to forgive me. Fantastic. I'm going to serve it in order to get. That's really what's going on, right? There might be a level of genuine connection there, at least in the minds of the people doing the service, but really they're trying to get something. Or in the ancient pagan religions, the pantheistic religions, the person serves one idol in order to get children, one to have a good harvest. One idol might be very good for I don't know, right? To get money or to be strong. I don't know what it is, right? But they serve all these different things in order to get. So is that really serving the being, or are you serving yourself? That's what's really going on. That's why the rabbis, with their insight, their deep insight, they said serving idols is really Avodah, service, Zarah, strange. The service itself is strange. It's not service. It's a strange service. You're calling it service. It's just not service. You're not serving. You're serving yourself. That's not serving something. You're getting that thing to serve you. So it's not just you're serving something which you're not going to serve. You're not even serving it. It's a strange form of service. The actual action of service is the wrong way around. Right? So it's Avodah Zarah. It's a beautiful idea. Yeah. So appreciate the Hebrew, because the word Zarah corresponds to the word Avodah. It's a qualifier for the word Avodah. So it's actually explaining what type of Avodah is it. Is it Avodah, is it service altruistically? No, it's a weird type of service. It's like only an external type of service, but really it's people serving themselves. Okay. Hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you in the next lecture. Please God, all the best.